Hey, bullfrogs. All right, well, this is my first recorded video of us reading. And so I'm not going to do a live today. And here is the book that we're reading right now. So we're going to read, we've already read the first 5 chapters. We're going to start with chapter 6 today, called The Banana Tree. So here we go. "This is your castle?" said Jack. Basho smiled. "In my heart, my humble cottage is grander than all the castles of the samurai," he explained. "And my banana tree is more beautiful to me than all the beauty of the imperial garden." Jack and Annie stared at the large plant with the long, droopy leaves. "I like this tree so much, I have taken my name from it," said Basho. Basho means banana tree. "Cool," said Annie. She looked around. "It's nice here." Not really, thought Jack. The cottage was shabby, and the droopy banana tree looked scrawny and sad to him. "Well, please come inside," said Basho. He slipped off his sandals and left them outside. He picked up a bundle of wood, then ducked through the low door that led into his hut. Jack and Annie took off their shoes, too, and followed Basho into a small, shadowy room. Basho opened his shutters to let in the evening air. "Please sit," he said. "Thank you," said Jack and Annie. Jack looked around the room for chairs. Hang on, let me show you the picture before I turn it. So remember, he said, "I'm going to take you to my castle," and that's what he was referring to. It was just a small hut. It's all what's in the eye of the beholder. Okay, so Jack looked around the room for chairs, but there weren't any. The only furniture was a low wooden table and a bamboo chest. 3 straw mats covered the earthen floor. Jack and Annie sat down on one of the mats. Basho lit a small oil lamp. Then he made a fire in his fireplace. "I will prepare tea for us," he said. "Rest while I draw water from the river." He picked up one of the 2 wooden buckets near the door and headed outside. When Basho was gone, Jack and Annie looked at each other. "I guess this is a 3-mat house," said Annie. Jack nodded. "You'd think a famous teacher of the samurai would have a 100-mat house, or at least a 50-mat house," he said. "I like this house, though," said Annie. "It's cozy." "I wonder who Basho is exactly," said Jack. "If he's famous, maybe he's in our book," said Annie. "Look him up." "Good idea," said Jack. He pulled the research book out of his bag. By the light of the crackling fire, he looked up Basho in the index. "He is here." Jack turned to the right page and read aloud. "Basho is one of Japan's greatest poets. He wrote short, beautiful poems that speak to people as clearly today as they did during the Edo period of Japan." "Basho's a great poet," said Annie. "That explains everything." "Sort of," said Jack. "It explains why he had to recite poems to the samurai, but it doesn't explain why Basho lives in such a dinky house." Basho opened the door and came in with his bucket. Jack closed the book and slipped it back into his bag. Basho poured river water into an iron pot over the fire. He pulled 3 tiny bowls and a small cloth bag from the bamboo chest. He took loose green tea from the bag and dropped it into the bowls. Then he waited patiently for the water to boil. Jack and Annie waited patiently too. Listening to the soft, rushing sounds of the river outside, Jack started to feel peaceful for the first time all day. When the water was hot, Basho poured some into each of the tea bowls. Then he handed the warm bowls to Annie and Jack. "Thank you," said Annie. "Thank you," said Jack. "You are welcome," said Basho. Jack carefully took a sip from the steaming bowl. The green tea tasted bitter, but he didn't mind it. Interesting taste," said Annie. "Basho, Jack was wondering if you're a famous poet. If you're a famous poet, why do you live in such a dinky house?" "Annie," said Jack, embarrassed. "She's kidding. I wasn't really wondering that." Basho laughed. "Long ago I trained to be a samurai," he said, "but I was not happy. All I wanted to do was write poetry. A poet did not need to live in a castle. A poet needs to live with the wind and the clouds, the flowers and the birds. Here I have a small garden and my banana tree. I have the sound of the river all day long. Here I have everything I need to write my poems. What do you write about? Asked Annie. Small things, said Basho. A crow picking snails out of the mud, a woodpecker hammering a tree, pine needles scattered by the wind. A poet finds beauty in all the small things of nature. And you teach poetry to the samurai? Asked Jack. Yes, the samurai greatly honor the art of poetry, said Basho. Poetry helps focus the mind. The samurai believe a truly brave warrior should be able to compose a poem even in the midst of an earthquake or while facing an enemy on the battlefield. Can you say one of your poems for us? Asked Annie. Let me think, said Basho. Well, I was working on a new poem yesterday. He reached for a wooden box under the table. He took a small piece of delicate paper from the box and read aloud. An old pond. A frog jumps in. The sound of water. Basho looked up at Jack and Annie. Said Jack. Nice beginning. It's not just the beginning, said Basho. It is the whole poem. A small moment in time. I think it's great, said Annie. I love frogs. Your poem makes me love them even more. Would you read it again, please? Jack said. He felt like he must have missed something. Basho read again. An old pond. A frog jumps in. The sound of water. Jack nodded thoughtfully. Good, he said. It's really good. And he meant it. The poem made him feel as if he himself had been right there by that pond, hearing the frogs splash into the water, breaking the silence. If you like it, you may have it, said Basho. He handed the paper to Jack. Thanks, said Jack. As he put the poem in his bag, a bell rang softly in the distance. Ah, the temple bells. Oh, there you are. Okay, the temple bells, said Basho. He stood up. It is time to rest. I will take a mat and sleep outside. I enjoy sleeping under the stars. And now, because of the poem you recited today, Annie, I shall think of them as diamonds in the sky. Annie smiled. You can stay inside and cover yourselves with these mosquito nets, said Basho. He pulled some nets from the bamboo chest and handed them to Jack and Annie. But do not worry. In my small house there are only small mosquitoes, not giant ones like those in the Imperial Palace. Basho, he's so funny. Jack and Annie laughed at Basho's joke. He gave a net to each of them. Then he picked up one of the mats from the floor and pulled it outside, closing the door behind him. The fire in the fireplace had died down. The light from the oil lamp had nearly gone out too. Jack and Annie lay on the straw mats and covered themselves with the mosquito nets. A cricket chirped on the hearth. Jack noticed a patch of light on the floor. He realized it was moonlight coming through the open window. All right, here's a picture. So there they are. Sleeping. There's an oil lamp. There's a light coming through from the moon into Basho's home. Jack reached out from under the net and put his hand on the square of pale moonlight. He could hear the rustling of the banana plant in the breeze. Half asleep, he imagined himself swaying with its long, broad leaves. This dinky hut is much nicer than a castle, Annie murmured. I feel like we're tiny crickets going to sleep. Yeah, I feel like I'm holding moonlight in my hand, said Jack, and like I'm a banana leaf dancing in the wind. Sounds like a poem, said Annie. Yeah, maybe I should write it down, said Jack, but instead, he fell fast asleep. All right, chapter 7 is called Clang, 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 with an exclamation mark, so it must be really loud. All right. Clang, clang, clang! Jack opened his eyes. The sound of bells filled the night. Not the gentle ringing of the temple bells, but a harsh clanging. Jack smelled smoke. He and Annie threw off their mosquito nets and stumbled to the door. Basho was standing in his yard looking at the dawn sky. It was black with smoke. The bells kept clanging. "Is there a fire?" asked Jack. "Yes," said Basho. "It must be very big, for the bells do not stop ringing from the watchtower. This is what we have feared the most. I must go and help the firefighters." "We'll help too," said Jack. "No, stay here," said Basho. He pulled on his socks and sandals, then grabbed a wooden bucket by the door. "If the fire gets close, wade into the river where you will be safe." "But we want to help," said Annie. "Yes, wait for us," said Jack. He and Annie pulled on their socks and sandals. "Come then," said Basho. "But if the fire begins to spread, you must promise to return here to the river." "We promise," said Annie. "Then bring the other bucket and follow me," said Basho. "I'll get it," said Jack. He hurried into the hut and grabbed the wooden bucket by the hearth. It was heavy, even without water in it. Jack hugged the bucket to his chest and rushed back outside. Jack and Annie followed Basho through the pine forest. They passed a farmhouse where two small children stood outside, looking at the fiery sky. "Our father says the lumber yard near the river is burning," the boy shouted to Basho. "He has gone to help fight the fire," said the girl. "Great piles of wood are burning." The fire bells kept clanging as Basho, Jack, and Annie rushed past the temple and across the narrow footbridge. They hurried up the winding dirt path until they came to the shopping market. In the smoky red dawn, people were pushing carts piled high with goods. They were running away from the fire. But Basho, Jack, and Annie ran toward the fire. The air grew hotter and smokier near the tea houses and the performance stages. Sparks flew through the sky. Tiles on rooftops were catching fire and crashing to the ground. Basho led Jack and Annie farther through the smoke until they came to the lumber yard. The fire roared as it burned piles of logs. Flames rose high into the sky. Firefighters were passing buckets of water up a line from the river to the fire. Others waved huge fans to beat back the wind-blown flames, while the most daring worked with hooks and axes, trying to separate the burning timber. "Help the bucket brigade," Basho said to Jack and Annie. "Get water from the river." Basho rushed to help the men beating back the fire with fans, while Jack and Annie hurried down to the river. All right, so here is a picture. See all the smoke? Everybody's rushing to help. Kind of reminds me of the big fire that we read about in San Francisco. Oh, wait, hang on. Jack filled their wooden bucket with water inside. It was so heavy he couldn't lift it. "Do it together," said Annie. "Right," said Jack. Using all their strength, Jack and Annie carried their bucket up the bank of the river. As they stumbled along, they tried not to spill the water. Jack could hardly breathe in the smoke-filled air. His throat and eyes burned. His face felt red hot. Finally, when he thought he couldn't take another step, they got to the bucket brigade. They gave their bucket to the person at the end, who gave them an empty bucket. "Get more," he said. Jack and Annie hurried back to the river with the empty bucket. They filled it with water and then struggled back up the bank. Over and over, Jack and Annie hauled buckets of water back and forth from the river to the line of firefighters. Everyone worked hard to battle the great blaze, but the flames kept shooting into the sky. Eventually, the fire leapt over the river, and timber on the far bank began to burn. "Oh no," cried a woman. "All of Edu will catch fire now." "The rice storage houses will burn down," said a man. "The harvest will be destroyed." Several people began weeping. Jack felt like crying too. Right in front of his eyes, the beautiful floating world of Edu was about to go up in flames. "This is hopeless," he said to Annie. "No, it's not," Annie said. "The wand! We can use the wand." "Of course," cried Jack. "But it's in my bag back at Basho's house." "We have to get it," said Annie. She shouted to Basho, "Basho, we're going back to your castle." "Yes, run for safety," called Basho. "Jump into the river." "Right," cried Jack. "Be careful," Annie shouted to Basho. Then she and Jack started running as fast as they could. They raced past the market. They ran across the footbridge, past the temple and the farmhouse, and through the grove of pines to Basho's house. Jack and Annie ran inside the tiny hut. Jack grabbed his bag and pulled out the wand. He waved it through the air. "Do something to make the fire stop," he shouted. Jack held his breath and waited. "Let me try," said Annie. She took the wand and waved it. "Stop the fire over Edu now," she shouted. Jack and Annie waited again. "It's not working," cried Jack. "We must be doing something wrong." "But this is for the good of everyone," said Annie. I know," said Jack. "And we've tried our hardest," said Annie. "Everybody has." "5 words," said Jack. "We have to use 5 words." "Oh, right," said Annie. She waved the wand through the air again. "Put out the fire," she yelled. Here's a picture of them standing with the wand. Five words. Put out the fire. Is that 5 words? Nope. "One more word," cried Jack. "Please," shouted Annie. Jack and Annie were blasted by blinding light. Jack felt himself shooting through brightness, then darkness, then back into light. An icy wand blew. The air was crystal clear. Early sunlight flashed on rock. Jack and Annie were standing on the ledge of a mountain. All right, chapter 8. This is the last chapter we're going to read today. And then tomorrow we're going to read the last 2 chapters and we'll be done with our book. All right, so chapter 8 is In the Red Dawn. Remember, dawn is the word we use for the morning time. Are you okay?" Annie asked Jack. She was still holding the wand. Her pigtails blew in the bright wind. Yeah, but what happened?" said Jack in a daze. He was freezing and out of breath. "Where are we?" "I don't know," whispered Annie. Jack shielded his eyes from the brilliant light of the red dawn and looked around. Pink clouds floated through the air like piles of cotton candy. Through a gap in the clouds, he saw hills shrouded in black smoke below. Beneath the smoke, flames rose from the city of Edu. "I think we're on Mount Fuji," said Annie. "Mount Fuji," said Jack. "That's crazy. Why are we here?" He stopped to catch his breath. He felt dizzy and lightheaded. "Edu's burning. We should be there." "Maybe the wand didn't understand," said Annie. "Maybe it was trying to save us by taking us far away from the fire." Suddenly a great mass of thick clouds piled up, ringing the mountaintop like a wall. The clouds swirled and whirled and tumbled. They changed color from rose to gold to gray to white. "What's going on?" cried Jack. The head of a gigantic monster rose from the bubbling clouds. "Ah!" Jack and Annie screamed. They grabbed each other and crouched down on the rocky ledge. The monster had spiky eyebrows and long curled whiskers. It had the horns of a deer, the forked tongue of a snake, and the fiery breath of a dragon. Through the swirling clouds, Jack and Annie could see the dragon's snake-like body curling through the clouds and down the mountainside. Its back was covered with shiny scales. Its spine had a row of shark-like fins. The dragon reached out its claws. They were like the claws of an eagle, only 1,000 times bigger. The claws gripped the side of the mountain. Jack made himself as small as he could. He covered his head, but Annie jumped to her feet. "I get it," she cried. "I know what's happening." "Thank you for coming." "Annie, get down," Jack shouted. "Jack, it's the cloud dragon," said Annie. "The puppet show, remember? The wand sent her here." "What? Why?" cried Jack. "She makes rain. Don't you remember? Rain?" cried Annie. "She commands the rain clouds." The dragon lowered her giant head, stretching it over the mountain ledge. Her scales glittered honey gold in the dawn light. She was still, very still, as if she were waiting for something. "Come on, we have to climb on her back," shouted Annie. "Why?" cried Jack. "We have to go with her," said Annie. "The wand brought us to the dragon. Now it's up to us to show her what to do." "Oh, okay," said Jack. Annie climbed onto the back of the cloud dragon. She sat between two of the dragon's shark-like fins. Jack climbed on behind her. He gripped the fin in front of him as if he were holding on to the horn of a saddle. "Fly over the fire," yelled Annie. "Make rain! Lots of it!" shouted Jack. The cloud dragon slid off the mountain ledge. Jack trembled with cold as the monster slithered through the freezing sea of clouds like a snake through the grass. Above Edu, Jack looked down. Billowing black smoke and red flames shot into the dawn sky. "Now! Rain now!" Jack said. The cloud dragon reared back her head. Black clouds flowed from her mouth. The clouds spread across the sky. There was a crack of thunder and a flash of lightning. Then rain began to pour down on the city. The dragon twisted her head this way and that. More clouds blew from her mouth, and more rain fell on the burning city of Izu. As the dragon slithered through the sky, breathing out mountains of storm clouds, rain fell on the flat lands of the rice fields, on the imperial garden, the samurai castles, the fish market, and the great bridge. Ooh, here's a big old picture. So there's Jack and Annie. See the claws. And there's Edu underneath on the bottom. Rain fell on the floating world of inns and stages, tea houses, temples, and farms. Rain fell on the lumberyard and the pine forest and the canals. Slowly the rain washed away all the smoke and flames. Even after the fires of Edu no longer flickered, the cloud dragon breathed more black clouds, and the rain kept falling steadily, soaking the gardens and fields, filling the shallow rivers and dried up ponds. "The fire's out," Jack shouted. "Take us to Basho's," Annie yelled to the dragon. The cloud dragon twisted her giant body. She slid through the dark clouds. Then she reared up until Jack and Annie couldn't hold on any longer, and they were falling backwards, somersaulting through the air. Splash! Splash! Jack sank to the bottom of the river. He flailed his arms and struggled to the surface. His head bobbed up. He spewed out water and gasped for air. He had lost his glasses. He dove back down and grabbed them from the river bottom, then swam back to the surface. Treading water, he wiped his glasses, then put them on. "Hi!" Annie yelled. She was holding the wand in the air, high above the water. "Hi!" Jack yelled back. Jack and Annie swam toward the bank of the river. They swam until their feet could touch bottom. Then they dragged themselves out of the water and collapsed on the muddy bank. They had lost their socks and sandals. Their silk kimonos clung to their bodies. Dripping wet, they gasped for breath and looked up at the sky. Big drops of rain splashed on their faces. There was no sign of the cloud dragon, but the cool rain kept falling, bathing the floating world of Edu. All right, so, wow. They saved the day again, actually, with the red dragon, the cloud dragon. So, I love when Basho read his poem and how simple it was. And this past year, y'all were writing some amazing poetry, and even the haikus. Y'all did an amazing job with your haikus, Bullfrogs. And so, how neat to think about how simple Basho was able to make the smallest thing into a poem. I want you to try today to maybe go outside and look in your backyard, or go maybe to a park with your parents, or just get outside in nature and see if you can make a poem just like, 2 or 3, 4 lines long. and see what kind of poem you can come up with. Okay, so tomorrow we are going to read chapter 9 and 10. Chapter 9 is called Flowers of Edu. And so we'll be through with this book after tomorrow. Now, I want to give you a heads up. So next week, Monday, we'll start our newest book. And actually, we might start this one on Friday. I'm going to be out some next week, so we might start this actually on Friday. And that way I can finish before I have to leave town on Thursday next week. So the next book you need to start getting is the next one in line is the Merlin Missions, number 10. It's called Monday with a Mad Genius. This will be our third chapter book that we will have read this summer. And this is only the third week of the summer. So, wow, we're doing really, really good. I'm so, so proud of y'all. So make sure and get this book, Mad Genius. I think I've read this one before. Seems like I have. But it looks really good. It's about a guy that's an inventor. I can't remember who it is in here. Oh, Leonardo da Vinci. Okay, so get this book. Be ready to read with me. Starting Friday, probably, we'll start that book. And tomorrow, we're going to finish this book, our second chapter book. I'm so proud of y'all for reading. Thank you for joining with me. And I will see y'all tomorrow. Keep reading. Love y'all. Bye.